How's it going, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, I'm doing a little different way of doing my previews because it is late and I'm not feeling the greatest. So we're not going to put my face on camera, but we are going to go over some of the new cards that they have previewed, starting with the one on the screen there. That is Blooming Marsh, one of the fast lands that was originally printed in Kaladesh. They are bringing back the enemy color cycle to go with the ones that were printed last year. In Phyrexia, all would be one with the allied cycle. So now we will have all 10 of the fast lands in the format for standard, as well as having new reprints available to us for commander and other formats. So this is a really good thing for us going forward. And we're going to move on to what I have labeled the Oko gang here, which is where they have actually given us the cards from Oko's gangs thus far. Not all of them have been revealed yet. Starting with Vraska the Silencer. For one, a black and a green, you get a Gorgon Assassin 3/3 with Death Touch. Whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, you can pay one. If you do, return the card to your side of the battlefield tapped under your control, and it is a treasure artifact. With sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color, and it loses all other card types. So basically, you're just destroying your opponent's stuff, and then you bring them back on your side as treasure tokens. It's just kind of a funny thing where she turns them to stone and collects them for herself. Then we have Rakdos the Muscle. For 2 black, and a red, a 6/5 demon mercenary with flying and trample. And whenever you sacrifice another creature, exile cards equal to the mana value of the card that was sacrificed from the top of target player's library until your next end step. You may play those cards and pay mana of any type to cast those spells. And you can sacrifice another creature. Rakdos the Muscle gains indestructible until end of turn and tap it, but you can only activate that once each turn. So it has a free sack outlet built into itself to do its first part. You'll note that it says target player, not your library. So you're able to actually do this to other players' libraries, steal their stuff. Now, Rakdos colored decks are generally good for doing self-sacrifice stuff anyways. So this builds into that and gives you something else to do besides, sacrifice and ping, which is usually what it's good for. But in this case, you get to steal spells and do things like that instead. Then we have Annie Flash the Veteran. For 3, a red, a green, and a white, you get a 4/5 human rogue with Flash. Haha, funny. And then when Annie Flash the Veteran enters the battlefield, if you cast it, return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And whenever Annie Flash becomes tapped, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. So it has a built-in pseudo version of Sun Titan on the ETB. And then when she becomes tapped on an attack, or you tap her for something else like a Convoke or something like that, you can exile the top 2 cards of your library to play those cards, but you have to do it during your turn, or at least the turn that she becomes tapped. Then we have the new iteration of Kellen, which is Kellen the Kid. For green, white, and blue. You get a human fairy rogue, 3/3 flying lifelinker. Then whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you may cast a permanent spell with equal or lesser mana value from your hand without paying its mana cost. If you don't do that, you can put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Now, this is the first Kellen that we've had that has not had an adventure tied to it. So this makes this actually quite flavorful because he was adventuring to find his father. Well, now that he's found him, he's no longer adventuring. So instead, he's trying to do things with not like you're casting spells from anywhere other than your hand. We're not in red, so we're not really getting that red benefit of, exile a spell, cast it until end of turn. So we're going to have to rely on things like adventures. We're going to have to rely on things like foretold cards. And we're also going to have to probably use some of the new plot cards that are coming into the set. And I'll explain that in a little bit when we run across one of those cards. And then the last of Oko's gang that's been revealed thus far from the story is Gissa the Hellraiser. For 3 black, it's a 4/4 human warlock with ward 2 and pay 2 life. Skeletons and zombies you control get +1/+1 and have menace. And whenever you commit a crime, create 2 tapped 2/2 blue-black zombie rogue creature tokens. The ability triggers only once each turn. And if you don't remember when we talked about the early preview stuff, committing a crime basically means targeting anything that your opponent has on the board, targeting them themselves, or cards in their graveyards. Those all count as crimes, also known as what I like to call fucking with your opponent. Pardon my French. But in this case, this is kind of fun. You can actually build up zombies just as long as you have a recurring way to do it. You can do this over and over again. So like if you say you have a recurring way to remove cards from a graveyard, such as a Withered Wretch, you go ahead and do that every turn. You can, in a full turn cycle, you can generate 8 zombie tokens that are essentially 3/3s because of her ability to pump them up, plus any other Lord's cards you might have in your deck. And that becomes a serious problem for your opponents really fast if they cannot deal with her. Then we'll move on to what I would call the other assorted legendary things that they've put in here, starting off with Honest Rutstein here. For one, a black and a green, you get a 3/2 human warlock that when it enters the battlefield, return target creature card from the graveyard to your hand. And creature spells you cast cost one less to cast. So this is really cool. This art has been revealed for a while now. They put this out probably about 8 months ago, art wise, and it just shows off Rutstein riding in, and he's instead of selling stuff to you, he's like almost like a car salesman rather than the items that he was selling on Innistrad. So this is kind of fun. So I kind of like this card, and it might actually see some play being a good return thing and cheapening up your creature spells. Then we have the return of a old card from a precon, actually. It's Vile Smasher, Gleeful Grenadier. For a black and a red, you get a 3/2 Goblin Mercenary. Whenever another outlaw enters the battlefield under your control, Vile Smasher, Gleeful Grenadier deals 1 damage to target opponent. Now, for outlaws in the game, they are considering any assassins, mercenaries, pirates, rogues, or warlocks as outlaws. So you can kind of play like a mix of those creature types to get this to trigger off. You don't have to play just one solid type of creature to get this to work. So that's kind of cool. Then we have Magda the Horde Master. For 1 and a red, you get a 2/2 Dwarf Berserker that says whenever you commit a crime, create a tapped treasure token. It only triggers once a turn. Sacrifice 3 treasures, create a 4/4 red Scorpion Dragon creature token with flying and haste to activate only as a sorcery. So just like with Gifts of the Hellraiser, you can do this a crime thing on each player's turn. So you have a way to like ping repeatedly and you pay into it or mess with their graveyard or whatever you got going on. This will trigger burn spells to the face, burn spells to their creatures, whatever you got going on. This is going to go out really well for us. Then we have one of our new mechanics in mounts. This is the Gitrog Ravenous Ride. For 3, a black and a green, you get a 6/5 Frog Horror mount with trample and haste. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice a creature that was saddled to it this turn. If you do, draw X cards and put up to X land cards from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, where X is the sacrifice creature's power and it saddles for 1. Now, saddle, if you don't know what that is just like crewing a vehicle, but you're essentially crewing a actual creature, which are these mounts. You saddle up the creature. So say you had a 3/3 that you saddled up to this thing. You swing with Gitrog. It deals combat damage to the player. You can sacrifice the thing that mounted up. That 3/3, you get to draw 3 cards and put up to 3 land cards out of your hand onto the battlefield tapped. This is really cool, and I can't wait to try this as a commander. And then the last legendary thing they revealed today is a second Planeswalker, actually, after they said they were only going to do 1 per set, but here we have a hidden second one. It's Jace Reawakened. For blue, starting priority 3. You can't cast this spell during your first, second, or third turns of the game. +1, draw a card, then discard a card. +1, you may exile a non-land card with mana value 3 or less from your hand. If you do, it becomes plotted. And -6 until end of turn. Whenever you cast a spell, copy it, you may choose new targets for the copy. Now, they've already said that it's only your turns. If you have a way to get this out with flash of any sort, like a Leyline of Anticipation, you can actually flash this in on your opponent's turn at the beginning of the first, second, or third turn of the game. +1, draw a card, discard a card. Real basic blue Planeswalker ability. -6, you can, copy spells, real basic there. Now, the real interesting thing here is the +1, you may exile the non-land card with mana value 3 and it becomes plotted. Plot is a way to pay a specific cost, exile the card out of play, kind of like Foretell, and then you can cast it on a later turn, not the turn you do it on, and you get to cast it for free. You don't have to pay for it. So that's what plotting becomes. So like, just as an example, non-land card, I don't know, a Doomblade, just as an example off the top of my head. You plot a Doomblade off to the side. So then the very next turn, you can cast that Doomblade for free. But it does mess with the timing restrictions on the cards because plotting, when you cast it, is sorcery speed. So even if it's an instant spell that you've plotted, you can only cast it at sorcery speed if it becomes plotted. Then we're going to move on to the assorted spells and other creatures that I have seen thus far. And first up here is Vraska Joins Up. For a black and a green, you get a legendary enchantment that says when it enters the battlefield, put a death touch counter on each creature you control, which is super strong. And then whenever a legendary creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So if you have a legendary creature out that has the death touch counter and they don't want to lose their thing to it, this will hit and then you'll draw a card. The neat thing here is you're in green, you're going to have trample creatures. If you put death touch counters on trample creatures, those trample creatures will smash your opponent as soon as they deal 1 damage to one of the creatures that are trying to block them. So this is going to be a very powerful card, and I think people are going to sleep on this one for a little while. We also have Tiny Bones joins up. So there's going to be, looks like a series kind of similar to the Oaths for the Planeswalkers. Well, these are going to be like join up cards for Oko's Gang. For a black, it's a legendary enchantment that says when it enters the battlefield, any number of target players each discard a card. And whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, any number of target players each mill a card and lose 1 life. Now, if you've been paying attention earlier this morning, I actually put up a video on a Legends Matter black-white deck with Colonel Autumn from the Fallout decks. This card is going to get a slot in that deck somewhere because this is really good because we're juggling legends out of the graveyard and doing aristocrat style things. So this would actually add to the draining game plan of what I was doing with that deck. Next is a creature that actually has the plot ability attached to it. It's Slick Shot Show Off. For 1 and a red, it's a 1/2 bird wizard with flying and haste. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and it has plot of 1 and a red. So like it says there, it says you can pay 1 and a red, exile it from your hand, cast it as a sorcery on a later turn without paying its mana cost, and you can only plot as a sorcery. So you can, exile that thing out and set it aside, and then later on you get it for free. So it's kind of like Foretell. In some respects, it's better than Foretell, and in other respects, if you had instant speed things that you can't do it. It's kind of weird. But I like the mechanic. I like this particular card because I think it'll see play in any kind of commander decks where you're trying to do spell slingery type things, like a blue-red deck. And it's a wizard, so it'd fit really well in a blue-red deck, like an Adelies the Cinderwind deck or something like that in the kind of format. And we have Ruthless Lawbringer. For 1 black-white. It's a vampire assassin that when it enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice another creature. When you do, destroy target non-land permanent. So you kind of get like a Vindicate on a stick kind of thing where you can sacrifice a creature to blow up a permanent. So I kind of like how this one was templated, and it's a vampire, so it fits in any kind of black-white vampires or Mardu vampires, which we do have a Mardu precon, and we'll talk more about that here in a little bit, that is coming, and this would probably slot well into that deck. Next up is Bovine Intervention, also been mentioned online as Swords to Cowshares. It's 1 and a white. For an instant, destroy target artifact or creature. Its controller creates a 2/2 white ox creature token. So this is kind of good. You get, for 2 mana, you get an unconditional, non-rare way to blow up something at the cost of giving them a 2/2. Well, if you're blowing up, a big monstrous creature that doesn't have indestructible, a 10/10 or whatever, who cares if you give them a 2/2? Then we have Intimidation Campaign. For 1, a blue and a black. It's an enchantment that when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. You gain 1 life and you draw a card. And whenever you commit a crime, you can return it to your hand. So this is actually really freaking good in like a control build of some sort. We're in the Dimir colors. You just play this out. You ping them, you gain life, and you draw a card. And committing a crime is really freaking easy because then you just like, okay, I'll make you discard cards, or I'll target your spells or whatever. And then you just bounce this back and play it again. And you just do that over and over again. So I kind of dig this card. Then we have another of the new abilities that came in the set. It's Spree. Now this is Insatiable Avarice. For a black. You have to actually choose one of the additional modes on this thing. So it's not a 1 black get something spell. It's 1 black plus 1 or more of these additional costs. Plus 2 on here. You get to search your library for a card and put it on top. So it's kind of like a bad vampiric tutor. You can pay 2 additional black, so triple black. Target player draws 3 cards and loses 3 life. Or you can pay 2 colorless and 3 black for a total of 5. You get to search your library for the card, put it on top, then you get to draw the 3 cards and lose 3 life. So it's very modal, it's very flexible in what you need, and that's what these spree spells are about, is all about the flexibility of giving you things that you need. So we'll talk about a couple more of them here right now, starting with the Great Train Heist. For a red, it's a spree spell instant. If you pay an additional 2 in a red, untap all creatures you control. If it's your combat phase, there's an additional combat phase after this one. So you can cast this during combat to get an additional one. So it's very similar to Relentless Assault. You can pay 2 colorless, so 2 in a red. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain first strike until end of turn, or you can pay just red. Choose target opponent whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to that player this turn. Create a tapped treasure token. Or you can pay 4 colorless and triple red, so 7 mana altogether. You get the additional combat phase. Your stuff gets pumped up and gains first strike, and whenever they deal damage, you get to create a tapped treasure token. But just know it's a creature. You can go ahead and create the tapped treasure token. So that's pretty good. You get a good amount of stuff out of this for the mana investment. And then the one that everybody's been talking about today is Final Showdown. For a white, you get an instant with 3 spree costs. You can choose 1 or more. +1, all creatures lose all abilities until end of turn. So it's like a version of Dress Down, which so you can shut down abilities. So say somebody else is wiping the board and you see that somebody is trying to do something like uh, give it indestructible or whatever, you can cast this in response to them giving it indestructible, or once the indestructible resolves, and it'll remove the indestructibility and blow it up anyways. You can pay 1 and a white, and you can give one of your creatures indestructible in response to somebody else's board wipe, or you can pay 3 white and destroy all creatures with this. So for 6 mana, which is 3 and triple white, blow up all creatures. If you pay the 1 additional, you got a choice of either make one of my creatures indestructible and then everything else gets kaboomed, or you can make all creatures lose their abilities until end of turn in response to destroying all the creatures. So if your opponents are like, well, my stuff's indestructible, like they do that, you're just like, nope, you're just gonna slide this in. And if you choose all this stuff, what'll happen is it goes in order of resolution. So all creatures will lose the abilities, and then your one creature will gain the indestructible, and then everything blows up. And then the last spell I found here that was kind of neat here is Double Down. For 3 and a blue, you get an enchantment. Whenever you cast an outlaw spell, copy that spell. So remember, assassins, mercenaries, pirates, rogues, and warlocks are outlaws, and you get to copy them when you cast them. So this is a necro duality, which only dealt with zombies for all these other creature types. So it's actually a little more versatile in that you can build a deck around all of these. There's 5 or 6 creature types here for you to build around and get copies of with this thing on the board. Then moving along, there's a few new cards that came out of the big score. Now, these were cards that were originally supposed to be part of epilogue boosters, and then epilogue boosters for March of the Machines flopped horrendously. So instead, they worked them back into the main set and have them just specially marked because they already had them ready to go with this logo and everything. So they just jammed them into the main set. So these cards are going to be a little more rare to get your hands on because they're not going to show up as prevalently as they would have if you would have just had them in the packs themselves. So first up is Vault-Born Tyrant. For 5 green, 6/6 dinosaur with trample. Whenever it or another creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 3 life and you draw a card. And when it dies, if it's not a token, create a token copy of it, except for it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So this thing has to be killed twice, essentially. And when the token comes into play, you'll gain another 3 life and draw a card. So even if somebody blows this up right away, you're going to get another 3 life and another card, and they're going to have to blow another removal spell to get rid of this thing. And of course, if you have token doublers like a Doubling Season or a Parallel Lives or anything like that, that token gets doubled as well. They're also introducing Torpor Orb. It's 2 colorless artifact. Creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. Now, remember, with the big score, these spells are standard legal. They were just like the Aftermath stuff. These are all going to be standard legal. Torpor Orb is now going into Pioneer. It is now going into formats that it was not legal in, and it is now. So this is probably going to see a lot of play, and this is probably going to be a valuable sideboard card for 60 card formats. As for Commander, I don't see it very often, but it's usually people who are playing very mean Staxy type stuff. And I usually want to just blow this thing up as soon as I see it or take that opponent out. And that's the best way to get rid of all their Stax stuff. Then we have Transmutation Font, which is the last one they've revealed that's new. For 5 colorless, you get to tap, create a choice of blood, clue, or food token. Pay 3 and tap and sacrifice 3 artifacts with different names, tokens. Search your library for an artifact card, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle, activate only as a sorcery. So as you're making treasures, blood, clue, food, map, all those good tokens, the new junk tokens from the Fallout set, you can sacrifice them to the Transmutation Font and then pay 3 mana. and you get to go get any artifact in your deck, be it, the Portal to Phyrexia or any of those kind of things. We also got new things in the, what do they call it? Breaking news, I think is what they call these. They look like newspaper fronts. First up is Dust Bowl. This card hasn't been printed in a long time and is quite expensive. It's a land that taps for colorless, pay 3, sack a land, destroy target non-basic land. Very powerful ability, especially if people are playing things like Field of the Dead or something like that. You might need to get rid of those lands as quickly as possible. Any kind of flip lands, any like the Ixalan gods that flip into lands, you can use this to get rid of them once they've been flipped into lands. There's a lot of good uses for this in Commander. And then the ever popular Mana Drain. This thing is quite expensive to play, and they're giving us a new printing of it. Blue, counter target spell. Beginning of your next main phase, add an amount of colorless equal to that spell's mana value. Just, if you're a blue player that likes countering things and this is your cup of tea, this is a good card to try to get your hand on. And the great part here is these cards are then getting introduced to the Arena client, so we can play them in Historic Brawl, we can play them in Historic, we can play them in Timeless. There's a lot of things that these things will be good for on the client. And then the last section I'm going to talk about tonight is the front-facing commanders for the precons. Now, they just announced that the front-facing commanders of the 4 precons, they are all going to be put onto the Arena client as part of the Mastery Pass, and you will get 4 copies of each as you earn them, or you can spend Mythic Wildcards to buy them as well. First up is Yuma Proud Protector for 5, a red, a green, and a white. It's a 6/6 human ranger. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each land card in your graveyard. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you can sack a land, and if you do, draw a card. And whenever a desert card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, create a 4/2 green plant warrior creature token with reach. So this is kind of an interesting lands matter commander. Kind of disappointed to see another Naya commander. This is like our 4th or 5th one in the last like 3 sets. So it's kind of getting a little overloaded in that space, but it's kind of nice to see something that deals with the desert stuff. Then we have the Is It commander, Stella Lee wildcard for 1, a blue and a red. Is a 2/4 human rogue that says whenever you cast your second spell each turn, exile the top card of your library until end of turn. You can play that card and tap and copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. Choose new targets. Activate only if you cast 3 or more spells this turn. So this deck is probably going to be all about cheapening spells up and cheap little cantrippy things so that you can actually meet the requirements to start copying your stuff that you're casting. Then we have the Sultai front face, Gonti Canny Inquisitor for 2, a black, a green, and a blue. It's a 5/5 Aetherborn Rogue. Spells you cast but don't own cost 1 less to cast, and whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, look at the top card of that player's library and then exile it face down. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled and spend mana of any color to cast it. So this is kind of neat. It fits the mold of Gonti, like it's ETB, steal somebody's stuff, but instead you can actually spread the wealth and smack all 3 of your opponents in a pod, exile the top card, and steal that card and be able to cast it at any point for any color. That is kind of cool, and I like this card. And then the last one is the Mardu deck. Now, I don't know for sure what the thing is. I think this is a complete Outlaws deck. Olivia Opulent Outlaw for 1, a red, a white, and a black. You get a Vampire Assassin. It's a 3/3 flyer with lifelink. That says whenever 1 or more outlaws you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token, and then pay 3 and sack 2 treasures to put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Activate only as a sorcery. So this is probably going to be more of a outlaws type deck where you're just like all assassins, mercs, pirates, rogues, warlocks, all those things. And she herself is an assassin, so she will trigger her combat damage thing to create the treasure tokens. And then being able to put the 2 things on there. If you have other treasure generators in your deck, you're gonna be able to feed those into Olivia. And 3 mana is not bad to put 2 counters on all your stuff in one go, even if you only have to do it at sorcery speed. So that's all I have for you guys tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you like, go ahead and comment, subscribe. All those good things help the channel grow on my road to 1,000. And we're going to go ahead and get back into more of these as the week goes on. Until then, I will see you in the next video.